When people hear the word Crusades, they usually think about religion. Holy wars, knights wearing crosses, battles fought in the name of faith. But history looks very different when you stop listening to the story and start following the money. Because moving hundreds of thousands of soldiers across continents does not run on prayers alone. It runs on gold, food, ships, contracts, loans, taxes, and logistics. What if I told you the Crusades were not only religious wars, but one of the largest financial experiments in medieval European history? What if the Crusades did not just change borders, but quietly created Europe's first war economy, a system designed not just to fight wars, but to finance them continuously? Welcome to Finance Historian Time, the channel where we uncover how money, incentives, and power quietly shaped the modern world. If you enjoy deep financial history like Financial Historian, The Invisible Hand, or Crayon Capital, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments because this channel grows through serious thinkers like you. Today, we're uncovering a truth rarely taught in textbooks. The Crusades were not only about faith, they were also about economics. Europe before the Crusades. To understand how revolutionary the Crusades were, we need to understand Europe before them. In the 11th century, Europe was not rich. It was not centralized, and it was not financially advanced. Kings had weak authority over their territories. Power was fragmented among nobles, lords, and the church. Most people lived in villages and survived on agriculture. Trade existed, but it was slow and limited. Most wealth was not cash, it was land. There were no real banks as we understand them today. No international financial networks. No large-scale taxation systems. When wars happened, they were usually short and local. Armies fought during specific seasons and then went home. Soldiers often lived off plunder rather than salaries. Europe simply did not have the economic systems needed for long, distant wars. Then, in 1095, everything changed. When Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade, Europe suddenly faced a problem it had never solved before. How do you fund a massive military campaign, thousands of miles away, lasting for years? Without destroying your economy, faith alone was not enough. The scale of the Crusades were not small conflicts. They involved hundreds of thousands of people over nearly 2 centuries. Soldiers, knights, servants, priests, merchants, sailors, and craftsmen. Entire societies were mobilized. Armies had to be equipped with weapons and armor. They needed food, horses, ships, and shelter. They needed supplies not just for weeks, but for years. Nothing like this had ever been attempted by medieval Europe. And suddenly, Europe had to answer a new question: who pays for all of this? The answer was brutal. The true cost of Holy War has always been expensive. But medieval war was financially devastating. For an average knight, joining a crusade could cost 4 to 5 times his annual income. Armor was extremely expensive. A warhorse was a luxury asset. Weapons, servants, food, transport, everything had a price. Most people did not have that kind of cash. So how did they pay? They sold land. They mortgaged estates. They borrowed money at high interest. This triggered one of the largest asset liquidations in European history. Families sold land that had been owned for generations. Nobles sold property inherited from their ancestors. Churches and wealthy elites bought these lands cheaply. Kings imposed special taxes justified as holy contributions. The church demanded donations. Even peasants were forced to pay. The Crusades didn't just destroy wealth, they moved wealth. How war created liquidity before the Crusades? Europe's economy was slow and static. Money barely circulated. Wealth stayed locked in land, but war demanded cash. As people sold land and borrowed money, gold and silver began to move faster through the economy. Markets expanded, trade increased, cities began to grow. Ironically, war stimulated economic activity, and rulers noticed something important. They realized that war could justify taxation. War could centralize authority. War could mobilize resources on a massive scale. This was a dangerous discovery, because once rulers learned how to raise money for war, they learned how to raise money in general. War stopped being an emergency. It became a financial system. Power shifts and state control. The Crusades quietly changed who held power in Europe. Small nobles lost land. Kings gained authority. The church accumulated wealth. Rulers who could tax, borrow, and organized logistics became stronger than those who could not. States began to centralize. To manage war finances, rulers needed records, officials, and bureaucracies. Early state administration expanded. This was not accidental. War forced organization. Organization created government. The Crusades helped transform Europe from feudal chaos into centralized political systems capable of long-term planning. And once those systems existed, they did not disappear when the wars ended. By the end of the early Crusades, Europe had changed forever. Land had been converted into cash. Cash had begun to circulate. Taxation had become normalized. War had taught Europe how to mobilize resources at scale, but funding war was only the beginning. Europe still faced another massive problem. How do you move money safely across thousands of miles? That question would lead to the birth of banking, credit, and international finance, the biggest problem left unsolved. By the time Europe learned how to raise money for war, another problem became painfully clear. Raising money was one thing, but moving money was something else entirely. The Crusades were not fought next door. They were fought thousands of miles away, in the Middle East. Carrying bags of gold from France, England, or Germany to Jerusalem was extremely dangerous. Bandits, pirates, corruption, and theft were constant threats. A single robbery could bankrupt an entire noble family. So Europe faced a new question. How do you move large amounts of money safely across continents? The answer would change financial history forever. The Knights Templar, from warriors to bankers, enter the Knights Templar. Originally, the Templars were founded to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They were monks and warriors combined, disciplined, organized, and trusted. And that trust became their greatest asset. Pilgrims and crusaders began depositing their money with the Templars before leaving Europe. Instead of carrying gold, they received a written document, a credit note. When they arrived in the Holy Land, they could withdraw their money from another Templar outpost. No gold transport, less risk, more security. This system was revolutionary. It was early banking, early checks, early international finance. The Templars built a network stretching from England to Jerusalem. They stored wealth, transferred funds, and even loaned money to kings. In many ways, the Templars functioned like a medieval central bank. And here's the key point. The Crusades forced Europe to invent banking. Without long-distance war, there would have been no need for such systems. War, credit, and government borrowing. As Crusades continued, rulers realized something powerful. They no longer needed to wait for taxes or loot. They could borrow. Kings began taking loans from the Templars. Italian merchants, wealthy banking families. War could now be funded in advance. This was a historic shift. For the first time, European states could spend money they did not yet have. Debt became a tool of power, and once debt exists, it rarely disappears. Interest payments locked rulers into long-term financial relationships. Wars became longer. Military planning became more complex. This is the foundation of modern public debt. The Crusades didn't just create banks, they normalized government borrowing. Italian city-states and the business of war. No group benefited more from the Crusades than the Italian city-states. Venice, Genoa, Florence. These cities were perfectly positioned between Europe and the Middle East. They provided ships, transport, weapons, food supplies, but they didn't do it for faith. They did it for profit. Crusader armies paid for transport. Kings borrowed money. Merchants secured trade privileges. Venice, in particular, mastered the art of war profiteering. Ships built for Crusades later became trade fleets. Military contracts turned into commercial monopolies. War created infrastructure. Infrastructure created wealth. This is a pattern we still see today. The birth of war industries. As Crusades continued decade after decade, demand never stopped. Weapons broke, armor wore out. Ships sank, horses died. Everything needed replacement. Entire towns specialized in military production. Blacksmiths increased output. Shipyards expanded massively. Armorers improved designs to meet demand. Small workshops turned into early manufacturing centers. This was not random. It was systematic. The more war was fought, the more production capacity was built. The more production capacity existed, the easier it became to fight future wars. This is the early form of the military-industrial system. War stopped being occasional. It became permanent demand. How war built strong states. Managing all of this required organization. States needed officials to collect taxes, administrators to manage debt, clerks to track spending. Bureaucracy expanded. Kings who could manage war finances became stronger than those who could not. Power shifted from feudal lords to centralized states. War forced governments to become more professional. And once professional governments existed, they did not dissolve when peace returned. Trade, empire, and long-term consequences. Militarily, the Crusades were largely failures. Economically, they transformed Europe. Trade routes expanded across the Mediterranean. Europe gained access to spices, silk, and luxury goods. Consumption increased. Markets expanded. Wealth accumulated in cities. The same financial systems used for Crusades were later used for colonial expansion. Standing navies, overseas empires. The Crusades ended, but the war economy remained. Follow the money. The Crusades teach us an uncomfortable truth. Wars are rarely sustained by ideology alone. They are sustained by economics. Once a society learns how to finance war, once it builds industries around conflict, once debt makes war affordable, war stops being temporary. It becomes a system. That system still exists today. Defense budgets, military contractors, debt-funded conflicts. The technology has changed. The logic has not. The Crusades are remembered as wars of faith. But history becomes clearer when you follow the money. To fight these wars, Europe invented taxation, banking, credit, logistics, and large-scale production. What began as a religious movement quietly became an economic revolution. The Crusades failed to secure the Holy Land, but they succeeded in building Europe's war economy, a system that still shapes the modern world. If you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe to Finance Historian Time, hit like, and leave a comment below. Were the Crusades truly holy wars or Europe's first large-scale business model for war? I'll see you in the next episode where history meets money.